I probably do not need to tell you what this is. It sits on your plate. It lives in your childhood. It shows up in your family stories, even when nobody names it. More than half the planet eats at least one bowl of rice every day. It's from Southeast Asia to the Caribbean, from China to West Africa. This grain does not just feed bodies, it shapes entire cuisines. Rice is not a side dish. It is the center. It is the backbone that let villages become towns, and towns become capitals. This simple grain has built empires, started migrations, and decided whether communities thrived or starved. It has sparked arguments between rulers, and it has paid taxes, wages, and debts. Some cultures treat it as sacred, others treat it as comfort. Almost everyone treats it as normal. That is the strange part. Rice is everywhere, so it is easy to overlook. Today, we fix that. We are going to follow rice through myths and archaeology, through conquests and trade routes, through markets and kitchens. You will hear about river valleys where rice changed the calendar, and floodplains where it changed power. You will see how one grain can become porridge, noodles, pilaf, and festival sweets, depending on where it lands. And you will understand why shortages of rice can shake governments, while a good harvest can hold a society together for many long years. We will visit the first breakthroughs that made rice farmable, and we will taste the dishes that proved how far one harvest can stretch. This is not only a food story, it is a human story about survival, patience, and invention. If you love learning the world through what people eat, subscribe to this channel and stay with me for the epic story of rice. There is an old legend in Vietnam that says rice once arrived in enormous pieces. Each night it grew bigger and bigger, and every morning it rolled itself to each doorstep, waiting quietly for the family to wake and eat. In exchange, rice asked for one thing: gratitude. A simple decoration left outside as a thank you. One night a farmer ate too much, fell asleep, and forgot the offering. The rice gods saw that as proof that humans were taking the gift for granted. So they shrank rice down to tiny grains and left it out in the fields, out of reach. From that day on, whoever wanted to eat had to plant, weed, harvest, and thresh, or go hungry. Stories like this exist all over Asia. Something this important had to be explained as divine. Rice became the foundation of society in places where it grew. It formed calendars, taxes, and social duties. It supported armies, and it supported temples. Today, rice still dominates farmland across the planet. Hundreds of millions of people earn a living planting, harvesting, milling, shipping, and cooking rice. It grows below sea level in wet paddies, and it grows high in mountain terraces. Where rice takes root, people build homes. And yet, the more common it is, the easier it is to ignore. So before we taste anything, we have to respect the scale of this story. Somewhere in deep time, someone planted the first rice on purpose, cooked it, and shared it. That small act changed everything. Finding that moment is hard, not because we lack clues, but because rice is tied to pride, and pride creates arguments. Still, we can follow the trail. We start with facts, then we work our way toward the first great breakthrough that made farming possible. Rice is a grass, and long before anyone cultivated it, wild rice grew in many regions. The oldest widely accepted evidence of rice used as food comes from China, in the Yangtze River Valley. But those early traces suggest something important. Rice was mixed with nuts and acorns, which implies it was gathered, not yet farmed. Farming required a genetic change. In nature, a ripe rice seed breaks away and falls. This is how the plant spreads. But for farmers, shattering is a disaster, because the harvest drops before you can collect it. Over thousands of years, people selected plants that held their seeds. Eventually, a mutation became common: rice that did not shatter. That one trait made cultivation possible, and it may be the most important turning point in agricultural history. Now the controversy begins. The oldest remains of non-shattering rice have been found not only in China, but also in India. Both places have ancient rituals and stories tied to rice, and both nations have strong claims to the breakthrough. Scientists describe two main families of Asian rice, Japonica and Indica. They share the same crucial non-shattering gene. That suggests a single origin. For decades, research has been shaped by national pride, and the literature can feel like a battlefield. A genetic study compared rice to wild relatives and proposed an origin in the Pearl River Delta. From there, rice could have spread across China, then moved overland into India, blending with local varieties along the way. The details still spark debate, but the outcome is clear. Once farmers learned to grow dependable rice, permanent settlements expanded quickly. Population rose, labor specialized, and food surplus allowed governments to form. With rice, the world entered a new era, and the kitchen began to evolve with it together. With reliable rice farming, people could store food, plan seasons, and survive bad years. Then the kitchen started to innovate, often for one reason: to make a small harvest feed more mouths. One of the earliest rice recipes we can describe is incredibly simple: rice cooked with water until it becomes a soft porridge. In China, it was known as zhou. Elsewhere, it became kanji, and in Thailand, it is often called jok. The genius is not fancy flavor. The genius is resilience. When floods ruined fields or drought shortened the crop, porridge stretched rice farther and kept families alive. Over time, cooks added preserved meats, seafood, or eggs, depending on what their region could spare. By the centuries before the Common Era, rice recipes multiplied. In India, rice cooked in milk became a sweet comfort, scented with spices and topped with nuts. In Japan, fish and rice were fermented together, an early ancestor of sushi. In China, people from wheat regions migrated south and began making noodles from rice flour. But some of the most influential noodles may have traveled with the Mon rice farmers who moved into Southeast Asia long ago. They milled rice, made a dough, fermented it in the heat, then pressed it through small holes into boiling water. The technique spread widely, and it still appears in Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, and beyond. In Myanmar, those noodles meet a fish broth and become mohinga, a breakfast that tastes like comfort and history at the same time. Each of these dishes tells the same lesson. Rice adapts, turns into soup, into sweets, into noodles, into fermented staples. Because people everywhere kept solving the same problem. How do we survive? How do we celebrate? And how do we make one grain feel like a complete meal? As rice spread, myths followed. Across Asia, people explained rice as a gift from compassionate deities because they could not imagine life without it. Some stories describe a goddess who bled and nursed the first grains into existence. Others describe a sacred bird bringing rice from the sky. In mountain regions, tales speak of dogs racing back from heaven with seeds tangled in their tails. And some families still offer the first cooked rice of the year to a dog in gratitude. These myths are not childish. They are a way of saying that rice is more than calories. It is protection, it is dignity. It is the difference between hunger and stability. Then there is the diversity. Rice did not stay one thing. Over centuries, it split into countless varieties: long grain, short grain, fragrant, sticky, red, black, and everything between. Markets and rice cultures can feel like libraries, shelves of grains that look similar until you cook them and taste the differences. The choice of rice changes the entire dish. Even the age of the rice matters. Newer rice holds more moisture and starch, so it clings and cooks softer. Older rice, stored well for months, cooks drier and separates, which makes it ideal for fried rice and restaurant service. It is the kind of detail a skilled cook learns through repetition, through failure, through watching elders measure water by instinct. Rice can absorb sauce like a sponge or stand firm beside curry, depending on how it was grown, milled, and stored. So when you see a simple bowl of rice, you are seeing choices that begin at harvest and end at the table. And when you travel, rice becomes a guide. Follow the grain in a market, and you can map the flavors of a whole country. After rice became essential in Asia, it began moving west in new ways. China eventually restricted exports because population pressure made supply fragile. So the story leans on India and the trade networks that linked South Asia to Persia. Persian merchants adopted rice, first as an imported luxury, then as a crop grown around rivers. When Alexander conquered Persia, rice entered the Greek world and later the Roman world, carried by soldiers, traders, and curiosity. At first, Western cooks did not treat rice as a daily staple. Many kitchens were built around bread and ovens, so rice often became flour, sweets, or even beer. Then another shift arrived from Central Asia. In regions that are now part of Uzbekistan, people cooked rice in stock with spices, creating an ancestor of pilaf. With new roots and new empires, that style spread into Persia and across the Middle East. Later, Persian influence returned to India under the Mughals, helping shape biryani, a dish where rice carries perfume, spice, and status in every bite. Wherever this technique traveled, it changed how people imagined rice. Rice was no longer only steamed. It became layered, toasted, scented, and cooked with meat and broth until each grain held flavor. In parts of the Levant, rice met yogurt sauces, lamb, and flatbread. And it became a celebratory meal, shared by groups, not served as a private bowl. One famous example is mansaf, often described as a national treasure in Jordan. In that dish, rice is a canvas for tangy, fermented dairy and rich meat, a meeting point of herding culture and trade. By this stage, rice had become a passport. It could move with caravans, ships, and armies, and it could still feel local wherever it landed. Because every culture taught it a new language of taste. There is a second miracle in the rice story, and it happened far from Asia. In West Africa, people domesticated a different species of rice, independent from Asian rice. This African rice thrived in harsh conditions. It tolerated poor soil, shifting water, and intense heat, and it matured fast enough to fit local seasons. A crop like that can change everything. It supported the rise of powerful societies along the Niger River region, and it helped cities grow into centers of trade and craft. Over time, rice moved across West Africa, feeding kingdoms and empires and becoming part of ritual and daily life. Then tomatoes arrived from Portuguese traders, and a new iconic dish took shape. Rice cooked with onions and tomato, and it sparked debate to this day. Arguments flare over whose version is best, whose history is oldest, whose pot is the true original. Whether you call it jollof or by another local name, the dish proves a point. Rice is a mirror. It reflects the ingredients, climate, and culture around it. Then the Atlantic trade ripped rice knowledge out of Africa and scattered it across the Americas. Many enslaved people were taken from rice-growing regions, and they carried skills that plantation owners depended on. In the Caribbean, rice became a daily staple. In Brazil, African rice varieties left a lasting imprint. In Peru, Chinese migration later blended fried rice traditions with local flavors. In Mexico, Spanish influence put rice beside stews and sauces until it felt native. The path is painful, but the legacy is real. Rice in the Americas is not one story. It is many stories layered, like a dish where each grain holds memory. And that is why rice history is never only about food. It is also about people, power, and survival. By the time rice reached every continent, it had already shaped politics again and again. Shortages have triggered riots. Control of rice has decided revolutions. In the 20th century, rice policy in Vietnam helped turn hunger into a rallying cry, and it changed the course of modern history. Stories like that exist in many places because rice sits at the intersection of land, labor, and legitimacy. Yet rice is also intimate. It is the smell of a kitchen at dawn. It is a pot on low heat and the quiet moment when steam tells you it is ready. It is wedding rice tossed in blessing. It is festival rice offered to ancestors. It is the comfort food you eat when nothing else feels safe. Today, rice is the most widely eaten staple on Earth. It grows in more than 100 countries, and production keeps rising as populations grow. It is affordable enough to feed a family, but diverse enough to challenge the best chefs. One grain can be light and separate, or sticky and tender. It can carry curry, absorb broth, cradle seafood, or turn sweet with milk and spice. The closer you look, the more layers you find: myths, science, conquest, trade, and daily habit, all packed into something the size of a seed. So the next time you see rice, do not dismiss it as plain. Remember the fields and terraces, the hands and harvests, the inventions that stopped shattering, the journeys across oceans, and the dishes that kept people alive. This has been our best attempt to honor the most important food story in human history, the story of rice. We will chase flavors across time. If you enjoyed traveling through history with your appetite, subscribe to this channel and join me for the next episode.